everyone, this is my AIS brine shrimp experiment. In this experiment, I grew up some brine shrimp and learned a couple of facts about them. As you can see, one of my images, pretty interesting. Brine shrimp are an extremely important part of the ecosystem since many different types of animals, including fish and flamingos, eat them. And they're an important part of the food web since if they die off, many other animals will starve to death. Brine shrimp live in salt water, and their name of brine literally means salt water, so it makes a lot of sense. A couple of questions I asked myself was, what can we identify as the factors that affect how they live? So will they die, will they live, will they do any of this? And also, what will cause them to live or die anyway? I didn't know any of this, so the only logical thing to do was to do an experiment. Some stuff I needed was a microscope given by my friend, some brine shrimp eggs, salt for some salt water since they're called brine shrimp, a dish for putting the eggs and water into, a secure place that won't be disturbed, and a bunch of time. Here's the microscope we used. Here's the dish. And also here's like a little bonus place to put the shrimp in. Now my hypothesis is that the brine shrimp will probably be able to be seen with the eye when grown. However, they should also be able to live in about 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. Probably a little bit higher since the ocean is a little warmer than that. But I don't think any colder will be okay since the ocean is not that cold most of the time. It's like tropical areas. Now, they should also be able to be affected by regular factors such as chemicals like ammonia, which can kill almost everything. Water quality, I did a test on that on last year's AS project, and maybe other factors such as overfeeding. Now, this experiment will be performed by putting the eggs into the thin dish with salt water. So as you can see the image right here. So basically, the brown stuff is all the eggs. I'll observe it every day with a microscope. Put the slides in here. See them. Now, our microscope isn't a digital one, which means that we can't just have a USB port and just plug it into the computer. It doesn't work like that. So we have to use a phone to take images of this part. So basically take an image, but it means it's a little blurry than normal. It's also 300 times zoom, which means that basically anything you see here will be 300 times larger than in real life. We'll also be feeding them yeast, since yeast can provide lots of oxygen, which they need to survive, and lots of food as well, because they're hungry. Here are the 3 images I managed to take, and also the stage chart. Now, I'll explain all these images in the other slides. Here's the first image I managed to take. This is about eggs, so if I grab my pointer out, you can see closely resembles this one right here, that one. This is the first image I took, and this is right after I put in the thing, so they're still just in stage 1. However, most of the times in nature, if things are sunk to the bottom, they're usually dead. So a lot of the eggs were at the bottom, which means that those ones probably cannot live, which is kind of unfortunate. These eggs are also in stage 1, which has a little pimple at the top. But there's a problem, meaning that you had so many eggs in the water dish, so they're going to always have to compete for the space and resources. So it's probably not a lot of them can actually survive to adulthood, since most of them cannot survive. The second image I managed to take was about lobster, sword-like creatures, which looked a little bit like shrimp as well. These are still brine shrimp, by the way. So at this point, they've already grown out of their eggs. Now they're free. And they also eat lots and lots of yeast, which is kind of good because they need to grow. And like us, we need to eat in order to be able to grow. Now, in the ocean, they are a tasty snack for lots of animals. So this is the point where they're actually starting to become edible because usually animals don't eat the eggs. They just eat the alive. And these shrimp, as you can see right here, my pointer, they're right here. So our image, you can see there's a little bit of orange tint, but it's not that accurate because it's really hard to get the color accurate. But you can see that the general shape with the 2 claws at the end are pretty similar, which means that we probably got them right. Now, as you might be asking, there's three different stages before, which is when they're trying to hatch out. Now, unfortunately for those ones, we didn't manage to take images since they grow out really fast. However, we managed to get the next image as well. This is the furthest stage we managed to get, as you can see right over here. Now, it's pretty similar to this one, except you can see there's like a lot of this like webbing over here, all this like stuff. So it resembles this one as well. Not shown is the fact that this tail actually goes a little bit longer than the image can actually hold. Now, this is the first stage we managed to get the actual image of, because although we took another image after this, it was still a stage 5 one, since it was probably one that didn't grow as fast. This one is at 6.5. I think it's like halfway between this one, which is this one, and this one. It hasn't completely grown all of it, but it's grown a little bit of it. And at this point, you can see they're actually starting to grow a pretty long tail, because as you can see, the last one, that's not a long tail at all. This one's pretty long tail. It'll grow longer and longer as it grows up. So I learned a couple things about this project, because although none of them managed to actually grow even further than that, I learned some things. So first of all, our experiment took a week. So probably in order to be able to survive all the way to adulthood, they'll take 9 to 13 days. Which kind of makes sense, since brine shrimp, they live short for about 3 months as a search stuff, but they also lay hundreds of eggs, so it's like kind of like a fast cycle. Probably take around 11, 12 days, almost to 2 weeks. Now, brine shrimp, they're similar to lobster in the fact that they're both crustaceans and they're both in the water, so it kind of makes sense that they're somewhat similar, although that might just straight be a coincidence. Since you can't really just search up, do brine shrimp looks like lobster on Google. That's something you have to have an experiment of, and that's why they're interesting. Brine shrimp also lay hundreds and hundreds of eggs. So most of the eggs probably will not actually survive to adulthood. Most of them will probably just perish at a young age. They're also extremely sensitive to environments. Hatch is important because once they grow up, they're actually extremely durable and can survive in the extreme environments, including actually being on the moon, which is kind of ridiculous. But when they're young, they can easily be killed off. And they're definitely worth it, as it's pretty interesting, since you can learn a lot of things that you don't know on Google. Now, you might be asking, my brine shrimp died, a lot of them, so it's important to know why did they do, so we can learn some tips about it. First of all, don't give them too much food, since they don't want to eat that much, because for that palate, it looks really small, because like our brine shrimp at large stage still looks like a bug, which means you can imagine how tiny, like how big like a chunk of yeast would look to them. So you can't really eat your entire body, and the human body isn't good at recognizing extremely small things divided by extremely small things, but basically don't give them like twice their body size of food. That's a bit ridiculous. Another thing is the water quality is another problem, because we had a big tank and we could always use a filter, but the problem is that we couldn't, and because it's just a thin dish. There's no way you can install a filter. That's just ridiculous. You also can't just like replace the water, because otherwise you're gonna be dumping out the eggs, and that's also not really what you want. So I couldn't really replace the eggs or the ammonia, which got up to around 1 ppm. That's for reference for my regular fish tank, which fluctuates between 0.0625 and 0.125 ppm. That's pretty safe, but 1 ppm, that's not really that safe. One more factor I learned is temperature, since our house could go sometimes below 20 degrees Celsius at night, and that's not that good for tropical animals. So for the ending, brine shrimp are interesting since they're kind of easy to raise up, but you can learn a bunch of things about the ecosystem in the ocean. They're also an extremely important part of the food web, which is important to emphasize, since if they die off, many other animals will die off and they'll starve, and then because that, all the animals will die off, and then really a big problem for the food web in general. Now, 3 important factors I managed to figure out were temperature, ammonia, and pH. Global warming is affecting them for 2 of them, obviously. First of all, temperature is kind of obvious. Thinking about ammonia can be directed by chemical pollutants that might occur in the water. And third, for pH, since carbon dioxide is mainly causing global warming, and carbon dioxide gets absorbed by water like a big sponge. However, for that big sponge, it can't really destroy carbon dioxide. So it turns into an acid. And acids obviously change pH. That's kind of obvious. Now, learning all of this, we can figure out how can we preserve this type of species. And by doing multiple of these types of experiments, we can figure out the environments of many other different types of species and protect them as a whole. Thank you. By the way, I have a couple of things. Sources, this is the microscope from my best friend. This is a chart for URL and the chart. And also, here's an interesting article about brine shrimp in the classroom, so you can see how article managed to grow their brine shrimp. And here's a bunch of videos. Here's stage 5 video, stage 6 video, and a bonus video. Thank you.